He stepped onto the CMA stage like someone returning to a place that barely remembered him. Keith Urban, the sun-kissed rebel of country music, whose guitar once softened even the toughest hearts, whose voice balanced tenderness and intensity, finally reappeared after months away. But the audience he faced was not the same one he had known. For years, America had celebrated him as the dreamer who shaped pain into melody, the four-time Grammy winner who transformed heartbreak into anthems. He was the quiet force, the intimate yet boundless storyteller of country music. Yet that night, as he performed Where the Blacktop Ends in the opening act, the applause felt uneasy, hesitant, weighed down with unspoken questions. People weren't just hearing the music, they were noticing the spaces between the notes, the silence left by a sudden split from Nicole Kidman, the whispers of another woman, the lingering tension from a controversial Mar-a-Lago appearance days before. Beneath the stage lights, he didn't just carry a guitar. He carried a storm, an uninvited presence that clung to him throughout the performance. His return was meant to be celebrated, yet the weight of everything behind him made the moment feel anything but triumphant. Instead, the stage became a mirror, reflecting everything he had tried to escape. The heartbreak, the rumors, the choices that had ignited a firestorm online. Beneath it all lingered a question that gripped millions. What really happened to Keith Urban, and why did his return shake a room before he even stood under Nashville's bright lights? Long before fame, Keith grew up in a world where dreams felt too delicate to voice. Born in 1967 in Whangarei, a quiet town in New Zealand, he was far removed from the grandeur of American country music. His childhood home was simple, nestled among silent streets and the salty scent of the sea. Life there wasn't cruel, but it carried weight. A father struggling with alcohol and a mother working tirelessly to keep the family afloat. From a young age, Keith learned that silence could serve as both refuge and wound. He often hid in corners, eavesdropping on arguments that rattled the walls like storms. Music was more than a pastime. It was a sanctuary, a small flame he protected in a world that often felt turbulent. His father's drinking cast long shadows across the household, over dinner, through sleepless nights, and across the mind of a sensitive boy. At school, Keith didn't quite fit in. His accent, his looks, his quiet nature made him a target. He endured teasing, being pushed aside, sometimes even shoved into lockers, singled out for reasons he could never fully grasp. And yet, in each moment of humiliation, he clung to the one thing that made him feel truly seen: the guitar. Despite their own struggles, his parents recognized the spark in him. They found a secondhand guitar, its frets worn and its body scratched, and handed it to him like a lifeline. From that moment, Keith spent hours strumming, fingers aching, sometimes drawing blood from the strings. He didn't play to impress anyone. He played simply to breathe. The sound was raw, uneven, sometimes trembling, but to him, it was freedom. By age 9, he was performing in small local competitions, standing on makeshift stages in front of audiences who barely noticed the child with the guitar. Yet every time he stepped up, something inside him shifted. The fear that dominated his school days lifted, and the loneliness faded. For a brief moment, he wasn't the boy hiding from anger at home or taunts in the hallways. He was someone else, someone alive. As he grew, his obsession deepened. He didn't study textbooks or traditional lessons the way other kids did. Instead, he studied chords, melodies, and phrasing, immersing himself in the language of music that spoke to his soul. He absorbed the peculiar magic in the voices of American country artists, voices that somehow felt like home, even though he had never set foot in their world. Glenn Campbell, Don Williams, Dolly Parton. He listened with a devotion most reserved for faith itself. Their songs whispered possibilities, hinting at a life beyond the one he knew. By 15, Keith made a choice that would alter the course of his life. He left school, convinced that no classroom could offer the lessons music had in store. He began playing gigs in smoky bars, where his youth startled the regulars and his raw talent silenced their doubts. Some nights he played for a mere $10, other nights for nothing at all. Sometimes, the only reward was a few hours away from the chaos at home. But night after night, one truth solidified: he would never surrender this gift. Even when fear loomed, even when he felt like a fragile thread stretched between expectation and despair, he refused to let go. The struggles of his childhood had etched something indelible into him: a hunger, a desperation, a longing to belong somewhere he had never yet been. Those early wounds shaped the man he would become: the tenderness in his voice, the fragility beneath his confidence, the love he sought, and the mistakes he would carry as lessons and scars alike. Everything truly began here, in that small New Zealand home, where a young boy clutched a guitar like it was the last light he had left. By the time Keith Urban turned 18, he was standing at the edge of a choice that would define his life. New Zealand had given him roots, but it had also left him with ghosts. Australia offered more: bigger bars, wider crowds, a music scene where his talent finally had room to breathe. He moved with little more than a guitar case, a handful of shirts, and a fierce conviction that if he didn't chase this dream now, it would die inside him. In Australia, Keith discovered the uncompromising truth about ambition: it demands everything. He played anywhere he could: dusty pubs filled with cigarette smoke, wedding halls where no one paid attention, roadside festivals where crowds drifted in and out like tides. He learned how to sing through exhaustion, to smile through heartbreak, to stand tall even when his pockets barely held enough for a meal. There were nights he slept on couches, nights spent rehearsing until dawn, nights he questioned whether raw talent alone could ever be enough. Yet something in him refused to break. Every setback sharpened him. Every rejection forged him. Slowly, the whispers began. Musicians admired his precision. Producers noticed the bright, clean, instantly recognizable tone of his voice. Crowds started to sense the force beneath the quiet smile, a force rising from the ashes of a difficult childhood. Still, Keith knew Australia and New Zealand were only stepping stones. His heart was already somewhere else: Nashville. And with that era came the realization that the road ahead would be as grueling as it was glorious. Fame did not arrive gently. It hit like a storm, bringing endless tours, interviews, and the pressure to prove himself again and again. Yet, Keith moved through it with the same relentless devotion that had carried him from Whangarei to Australia to Nashville. Every chord he played, every lyric he sang, was informed by the years of struggle, the empty bars, the cold car mornings, the loneliness of a young man chasing a dream half a world from home. His music became a mirror, reflecting the pain he had endured, the hope he had clung to, and the fragile beauty of life he had learned to cherish. And just as the world began to embrace him, so too did the shadow of expectation. Awards came, Grammy nods, recognition, but alongside them came scrutiny, rumors, and a personal life magnified in the public eye. Each spotlight felt like a double-edged sword. It illuminated his talent, but exposed every vulnerability. Yet on stage, under the bright lights, Keith Urban became something larger than fear or doubt. He became the alchemy of heartbreak into melody, struggle into song. And as he strummed his guitar, voice trembling yet sure, the world could feel it. A boy who had once feared silence now filled it with music that spoke louder than words ever could. A moment that seemed to write itself in the language of fate. Nicole, already a star of cinema, entered his orbit like a beam of light he hadn't realized he was waiting for. The collision of two worlds, Hollywood glamour and country grit, felt improbable, almost cinematic. But for Keith, it was more than spectacle. It was a meeting of souls that recognized the same hunger, the same scars hidden beneath the surface. Their courtship was watched by millions, every appearance dissected, every smile and glance parsed like a line of poetry. Yet behind the red carpets and headlines, Keith carried the same quiet intensity he had nurtured since Whangarei, a fear of losing himself in the glare of fame, a determination not to let love become another performance. When they married, it felt like a culmination of everything. The boy who played through loneliness, the man who climbed through rejection, the artist who had finally found a place to belong. And for a time, It seemed the storm had passed. The spotlight still shone, yes, but now it highlighted a harmony he had never dared hope for, a partnership that grounded him, a love that made the music sweeter, the lyrics sharper, and the silences between songs fuller. Yet fame is never still, and the world around Keith never stopped spinning. Rumors, speculation, and the inevitable scrutiny of every choice, both personal and professional, reminded him that belonging could be fragile, that the past and the present are always entwined, and that the music he made was the only thing immune to gossip, the one constant that carried his truth into the hearts of millions. And that weight, invisible to most, pressed on him in ways no stage or award could measure. Every note he played carried not just music but expectation, expectations from fans, from media, from a world that had decided who Keith Urban should be. Behind the polished smiles and effortless charm, there were moments of exhaustion and quiet doubt. He had learned long ago that vulnerability could be powerful, but it also left him exposed. And now, married to a global icon like Nicole, every gesture, every song, every glance was amplified. Love became performance, intimacy a public spectacle, and even joy carried the risk of misinterpretation. Yet Keith continued. He performed, not for the accolades, not for the cameras, but because the guitar had always been his refuge. The music was the place where he could breathe, where the boy from Wangari, the boy who survived taunts, loneliness, and fear, still existed. And in those moments, when the lights dimmed and the crowds fell silent, he could remember why he started. The simple, sacred connection between a string and a soul. But life, as always, had other plans. Rumors, scandals, and controversies, none entirely of his making, began to swirl. The Mar-a-Lago performance, whispers of a sudden split, speculation about personal choices, all of it loomed over him like a storm on the horizon. The world was listening, yes, but not to the music. They were listening to the spaces between the notes, trying to read the man behind the melodies, and Keith knew that this was a stage unlike any he had ever faced. He stood under the lights again, guitar in hand, carrying not just his own story, but the weight of expectation, of rumor, of love and loss. And in that quiet, almost sacred moment, he played, not to prove anything, not to satisfy the world, but to remind himself that he was still here, still fighting, still human, still capable of turning heartbreak into art. And in those moments, the boy from Wangari, the one who first picked up a guitar to survive the silence at home, felt the weight of everything converge. The applause, the accolades, the lights that once felt like freedom now pressed like an invisible hand, reminding him that no amount of success could erase the shadows he carried. Keith fought. He fought to stay present, to stay grounded, to honor the love he had with Nicole, to honor the music that had saved him. Yet the cracks in the armor widened when exhaustion and temptation met, when nights blurred into haze and old ghosts whispered reminders of every insecurity he had ever carried. And still, he rose because music was not optional, it was survival. The guitar became both shield and confession. Every riff, every note, every melody was a lifeline, a way to hold on to the part of himself that refused to break. The public might only see the polished star, but Keith knew the truth. Triumph was not linear, and battles won in private often went unnoticed. The paradox of his life was stark. Fame had given him everything he dreamed of, yet it demanded everything he had, and more. He was the golden-haired outlaw of country music, a hero to millions, yet still a man wrestling with the same vulnerabilities he had known as a child. And as he stepped onto the next stage, guitar in hand, the world waited, not knowing, not seeing, the quiet storm he carried with him, the personal battles hidden behind the spotlight, the shadows that always lingered just beyond the glow of fame. The backlash was instantaneous. Social media lit up like wildfire, and every post, every tweet, every comment dissected Keith's intentions. Some called it tone-deaf, others brave, others irrelevant, but Keith felt none of it mattered. The song wasn't a political statement, it was a story, a life, a truth he wanted to honor through music. Yet in the court of public opinion, nuance rarely survives. Keith stepped off that stage and felt the weight of every whisper, every speculation, every sideways glance that seemed to follow him from barstools in Nashville to the bright lights of Hollywood. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent a lifetime seeking connection through music, yet the very same music now became ammunition for debate. He tried to breathe, to center himself, but the world had begun projecting stories onto him that he had never told. Rumors, assumptions, and questions swirled around like a storm with no eye. He had always been resilient, shaped by rejection, by lonely nights with a guitar, by the shadows of a childhood spent learning to survive. But even he knew this was different. This was a public storm, and there was nowhere to hide. Yet in the chaos, the music remained. Every chord, every lyric, every note reminded him of who he was beneath the headlines. The boy from Whangarei who learned to breathe through a guitar. The man who had clawed his way into the world he had once only dreamed of. The survivor who refused to let outside noise define his truth. The silence pressed in like a physical thing, thicker than any stadium crowd he'd ever faced. Every step he took toward the microphone felt heavier than the last, as if the stage itself were asking him to justify a life he hadn't chosen to explain. The audience didn't just watch him. They measured him, dissected him, projected onto him every story they wanted to believe. And yet, despite it all, Keith lifted the guitar. His fingers traced the frets with the familiarity of decades of practice, every callus a testament to survival. The first note cut through the tension like a small beacon in a storm, and for a fleeting heartbeat, he was just a musician again. Not a tabloid headline, not a political flashpoint, not a divorced husband under public scrutiny. Just a man speaking through the strings, letting the melody do what words never could. The song began to swell, fragile and defiant at once. Some in the crowd softened, some stiffened. But Keith didn't change a note. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He simply played, letting the music carry the weight of a life lived under both scrutiny and adoration. In that suspended moment, the applause and the outrage became irrelevant. The boy from Whangarei, the man who had clawed his way from dusty pubs to international stages, existed purely in the space between notes. And somewhere beneath the floodlights, amid the whispers and judgments, Keith Urban realized something vital. The world would always interpret him wrongly, but the guitar, his lifelong confidant, would never mishear him. And in that quiet, the space between applause and breath, Keith felt the pull of every place he had ever called home, and every place that had called him nothing at all. The guitar hummed against his chest like a heartbeat, steady, familiar, real. Here, there were no expectations, no headlines, no judgments. Just him and the music, tracing the edges of the life he had fought so hard to live. Every chord he strummed was a confession, every melody a bridge between past and present. The longing embedded in his voice was not just for love or recognition. It was for understanding, for a place where he could finally exist as both the boy who trembled in the shadows and the man who could fill stadiums without losing himself. And maybe that was the quiet revelation. Belonging was not a city, a stage, or even a person. It was a moment of truth held in the music, a fragile but unbreakable home that no rumor, divorce, or scandal could ever take away. Keith had survived the storms, the expectations, the betrayals, and the silence, but in the space between notes, he was finally free. Alone, but not broken. The Mar-a-Lago stage, the CMAs, the bright lights, they were not arenas of judgment for him. They were mirrors reflecting the fractured self he had carried for years. Each note of Pink Pony Club was an anchor, a tether to something real amidst the chaos of perception and rumor. For Keith, music had always been the place where he could be fully human, where the world's expectations faded and only the raw, unfiltered pulse of life remained. He understood the song not as a provocation, but as a confession, a reminder that every soul craves a space to belong, even amid scrutiny and misunderstanding. The irony, of course, was that his honesty, his vulnerability, was interpreted as defiance. But Keith had long learned that truth and perception rarely walk hand in hand. And so, when he stepped onto the CMA stage, guitar in hand, he carried more than chords and lyrics. He carried himself in all his complexity, ready to remind the world, and perhaps himself, that belonging was never about where the applause came from, but where the heart could finally breathe. In the lead-up to the CMA performance, Keith was introspective, not broken, cautious, not defeated. He wasn't seeking to reclaim fame. He was trying to reclaim himself. On stage, he hoped the music would carry him as it always had, but the noise of narratives beyond his control drowned it out. Hidden in his voice was a quiet apology, not to fans, not to Nicole, but to himself. To the boy who dreamed amid chaos, the teen who played until his fingers bled, the young man who believed music could save him. Keith knew that the world often adores the artist loudly, while forgetting the person beneath. And sometimes, the artist forgets himself too. Music remained his refuge, long before it became his career. That night, even the refuge trembled. The public saw controversy. The industry saw a star weathering hardship, but those who truly listened heard something else entirely. A man finding himself in every note, reminding the world that belonging starts from within. They heard a man reaching for a place he hadn't yet found, a place he was still searching for. The truth was simple and quietly devastating. Keith Urban didn't return to claim a crown. He returned because music remained the one part of his life that still felt like home. Keith's story isn't that of a fallen star. It's the story of a man who has weathered storms his entire life and still summoned the courage to step back into the light. The CMA comeback wasn't triumphant. It didn't silence the noise or heal the lingering wounds, but there was something quietly heroic in the way he stood there, guitar in hand, heart exposed, facing a world ready to judge before it listened. For 3 decades, he had given everything to music. The tenderness in his voice, the honesty in his lyrics, the fragments of himself he never revealed anywhere else. And in that moment, even amid chaos, the man behind the star was still there, unwavering. Fame crowned him, love steadied him, and heartbreak reshaped him. Now, in this new chapter, he stands stripped of illusion, but not of spirit. His journey shows that even legends bleed, even icons falter, and even the strongest hearts can lose their way before finding it again. A man who has survived his past can survive anything. If his story reached you, if it stirred something quiet and human inside, honor it, share it, carry it forward. Keith Urban is not finished. Music remains his refuge, and somewhere ahead, beyond the noise, beyond the rumors, a new beginning awaits him, steady, unwavering, and finally his.